This is Notebook Taking Guide 3.4 for Math 2, factoring quadratics to find the zeros. So again, if we remember, zeros are our roots or our answers when we factor and set equal to 0. So how do we factor a quadratic equation? We're going to make sure that our quadratic equation is set equal to 0. If it's not, we're going to move terms so that it is set equal to 0. Then we're going to factor the equation. If the leading coefficient is 1, is what we're doing today, we're going to find the factors that multiply to the last number and add to the middle number. And then we're going to take each factor and set them equal to 0. I want to remind you, when we do that, a few things could happen. We could get two answers. We could get the same answer twice. Or we could get no answers in the real number system, which means they would be imaginary numbers. Okay, so here's our first problem. It says to find the zeros. So what we're going to do first of all is we're going to factor this. So I need to find two numbers that will multiply to -5 and add to -4. Those two numbers will be 5 and 1. I said 5, but I wrote 4. That's funny. 5 and 1. The 5 is going to be negative and the 1 is going to be positive. That way they'll multiply to a -5 and they'll add to a -4. I'm going to take those out of the parentheses and set them equal to 0. So I'll have x plus 1 equals 0 and x minus 5 equals 0. Then I'm just going to solve those really fast. Subtract the 1 over to get x equals -1 and add the 5 over to get x equals 5. These are my two answers or zeros of my graph. If I were to graph this quadratic equation, that would be where my graph touches or crosses the x-axis. Okay, here's my next problem. Again, doing the same thing, finding the factors that I can set equal to 0. So finding two numbers that will multiply to 12 and add to 7. I know 3 and 4 will work for that if I make them both positive. So I'm going to take both of them and I'm going to set them equal to 0 now. X plus 4 equals 0 and x plus 3 equals 0, and then solve each equation. Minus the 4 over, so I get x equals -4, and minus the 3 over, so I get x equals -3. These are my two roots or zeros to my equation. Alright, I need to make sure that I'm being a little bit more clear on here because I'm assuming that we remember how to factor, but it's been a while since we factored. So let's just remember here on this one that we're going to multiply to the back, which is a -25. And we're going to add to the middle. I'm trying to write 25 here, but it's not really letting me. And we're going to add to the middle number. In this case, the middle number is 0 because there's no x term there. So what will multiply to 25 and add to 0? Well, I can do 5 times 5 to get 25, but the only way they'll add to 0 is if one is positive and one is negative. Then I'm going to take them and I'm going to set them equal to 0 and solve them. So add the 5 over to the other side to get a equals 5, minus the 5 over to the other side to get a equals -5 for my two solutions. Alright, one last problem. If you notice on this one, it's not set equal to 0, so I can't factor it if it's not set equal to 0. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract the 64 over to the other side of the equation so that I can have it set equal to 0. So it doesn't combine with anything, it kind of just gets thrown in the back. So now I'm going to be doing my factoring. I'm going to find two numbers that will multiply to 64 and they're going to add to be -30. So -64 they multiply to, they add to be -30. So I need to think about my numbers for just a minute and list them out. Alright, if I listed my factors of 64, I could do 1 and 64, 2 and 32, 4 and 16, and then 8 and 8. So I'm going to look at those factors and see if I can find the one that will actually add to be the right number. And I can see that I can get 32 and 2 to be a -30 if the 32 is negative and the 2 is positive. So I'm going to have x minus 32 and x plus 2. I'm going to bring those out of the parentheses and solve them. So x minus 32 equals 0, x plus 2 equals 0. I'm going to add the 32 to the other side on this one to get x equals 32. And I'm going to subtract the 2 to the other side on this one to get x equals -2 for my two factors.